Okay, I was struggling to get the boot off, and one of the problems that you have is when you install RCV's outer axle seals, you have very little room now, probably an eighth of an inch, to slide this back to break the seal. And in the process of doing that, the whole stub shaft just came apart. I definitely think that that's problematic. That should not have happened. It just pulled right apart by hand. So most certainly this RCV outer stub shaft was broken. What does that mean for my locker? Well, maybe my locker isn't the problem at all. This thing should not have come apart like that. Look at that. Attempting to take the orange boot off, and the outer stub shaft just completely separated and came out in my hand. I don't grease in there. I'm not seeing any parts. I don't know how the hell this thing separated. Was this in fact the problem? I don't know. And now the next question is, how the hell do I grab a hold of that axle shaft? All right, apparently there's usually a C inside here on this shaft that holds the outer end, holds it together. I can't even find that. I'm gonna look through all of that and see what I can find, but thing just came off like nothing. And I can't tell because the boot's in the way, and if I can't get the boot out, I might have to destroy it to get it out, or maybe I can heat it up and pull it through the hole of the knuckle. If not, it's starting to kind of look like I might have to undo the knuckle, keeping the tie rod attached, and bang this off to have some room to work. And I'm also looking at probably having to get some vice grips on there after I deal with the boot. So I've got some work ahead of me there. I think the next thing I'm going to do is clean this out and see if there's any metal in there, see if I can examine how the splines look on the outer. I've called Josh at RCV, or at least the warranty department, and left a message hoping they'll call me back and stand behind this RCV axle shaft. These shafts were bought about 2.5 years ago, and they've got approximately 10,000 miles on them. And kind of surprised to see this, but the only thing I can do now to determine if this was in fact the whole problem and rule out completely the locker, is I think I'm going to install my stock driver's side axle shaft, and I have to put everything back together and perform the same test I did and see if the problem is gone. Sadly, I can't really think of a way to do it without putting everything back together with the stock axle shaft. So that's what's going this morning. I'm really surprised. I didn't expect that. Kind of a wrestling match here today. All right, don't try this at home, boys and girls, but very difficult to do this. I mean, I didn't want to take the knuckle off. I might have to yet, but I was talking to John, and he said some guys are able to work this bell through the hole of the knuckle, and using my heat gun over there to warm it up, and a lot of oil, it is coming through. So I'm just going to keep working this through, and then then I'll be able to really examine the inner shaft and the spline. And more importantly, I've got to put some vice grips on it. I've got to come up with some kind of way of pulling it out of the carrier and through the inner axle seals and the outer axle seal. Okay, first time for everything. Using oil and gently warming it, I was able to. This is a patented product by RCV, and the thing is absolutely amazing. It's so durable, but if you decide to cut one of these, I think you're looking at about $68 or $58 a piece. So I've got to call into RCV. We'll see if they call me back. So now I'm going to clean that axle shaft off those splines and examine them carefully. There's no sign of a C-clip anywhere in there. It'll be interesting to see if I can find it in here. I've got to carefully dig through this and clean this out. But this thing just basically just pulled right out of here without me even trying. And most certainly this was a contributory factor to all the jumping around and the skipping. So again, it looks like to really rule out the locker, I'm going to pull this axle shaft and then install the stock driver's side short axle shaft. And I think I'm going to put everything back together and try the experiment. I'll have to get some new, if it works and everything's okay, I'll probably run the 2 different axle shafts until I come up with a game plan for the replacement and see what RCV tells me. And then obviously I got to get some couple quarts, quart and a half of 80/90 Mopar oil for the front diff. Or it could all be in vain, put it all back together, and the lockers could still be skipping around. So really between a rock and a hard place here. It's just the process of elimination and a lot of labor. Well, very dark day here, or maybe it's a very good day. Look at the freaking splines on this RCV axle shaft. Obviously that's the inner shaft going through the outer tube seal and then into the carrier. There's generally a C-clip. You can see a groove right here where it should be, completely disintegrated, no trace of it. So now my next trick is going to be to carefully get some vice grips on that with a rag and try to work it out. I got to get that axle shaft out. So cleaned up the outer, the stub shaft. This is the spline here that goes into the unit bearing. Looks fine. Difficult to see here. I think I got to take this to a use a good parts degreaser and get all that grease out and examine the splines there. But clearly what I can see on the inner axle shaft is they're annihilated. They're ground down to nothing. I'm going to try to get a good shot of that right there, all the way around. So I got to take a break and regroup here. Don't judge me, it's early in the morning, but I think I'm going to have a drink and a cigar. I'm really entertaining, if I can get this axle shaft out, installing the stock short axle shaft. This is my Rubicon stock axle shaft. I have them both here. I put that short driver's side in, and then I would be able to put everything back together and conduct the same test that I did earlier and see if the clicking and the jumping is gone and if in fact it locks. There's a real good chance that all my problem was right there, but without putting it all back together and conducting that test, I really don't know how to definitively do that. And I'd hate to take the carrier out and go through that whole process for nothing. So I think I'm going to put everything back together with the Rubicon axle shaft installed on the driver's side and get this thing out in the driveway, lift it all up again, and conduct the same test I did in my first video. If I'm fortunate and it is just this, then that's really a home run. I've already contacted RCV, their warranty department, left them a detailed message. They have not got back to me yet, but I'm hopeful that they would cover this RCV axle shaft, which I've owned for about 2.5 years, and according to my record, somewhere in the vicinity of 10,000 miles on them. Now, I've done videos on RCV axle shafts, the outer seals, etc., and I'm a fan, but I always did say that somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 miles, they would click. And almost everyone I know that has them, at some point they start clicking when you're in 4 high or 4 low, when you make sharp turns. I had talked to Josh at RCV. He assured me, no worries, not no worry at all. These axle shafts will handle 40-inch tires. So in this particular case, we've got a broken outer here. It just annihilated that spline right there. So going to begin the process here shortly of trying to get that axle shaft out and reinstall the original stock U-joint from front axle shaft. Well, I didn't even need to use vice grips. I put a glove on and I was able to grab that messed up spline, and basically it freed itself rather easily from the carrier. So now I'm going to carefully pull this out through the outer axle seal, the tube seal, and examine the gears on the locker side. So that might be telling as well. Kind of an interesting opportunity here. So a long time back, a couple years ago or what have you, I installed these outer axle shaft or outer axle tube seals by RCV. And I just looked inside the axle tube, absolutely crystal clear. You can see the grease there that comes out through the gaskets. You basically have like two gaskets here, and they're next to one another with like an 1/8 inch gaps, and the shaft passes through that, and then you have the flat Zerk fitting right there. So the grease goes in here, and then it works its way all around this channel, providing a nice seal for the axle shaft. The inside of my axle tubes are spotless. And that also shows me very clearly that my inner axle seals that I installed some time ago are holding up perfectly. So really nice to see that. Kudos, RCV. Okay. This is the RCV chromoly axle shaft. You can see here, this is the spline that goes into the locker, about up to there, as you can see. And the spline's absolutely perfect. So we follow the shaft down. Somewhere in here it goes through the outer axle shaft seal. And that could be this area that's right here. But more importantly, here's our failure here. You can see the groove where some type of ring would be to hold the outer portion of the CV joint onto the shaft, but this is just ground down metal here. These teeth are so rounded, so far gone, and this would explain why there was clicking. I mean, there's a really good chance that this is all that sheared off or broke on my front end. But in order to determine that definitively, I am going to attempt to install the stock Rubicon U-joint style axle shaft back into the locker. So that's where I'm at, and I'm hopeful. And I'm also hopeful that RCV will stand behind this product right here. Give me a new axle shaft. Haven't heard back yet. Okay, what I've done is I've greased up the OEM Rubicon axle shaft, the spline that goes into the carrier, and I'm about to slide that through the knuckle and through the outer axle tube seal into the carrier. So should be okay. I took some time to grease the front here that's going in. All right. It's definitely in. Okay, what I've done is I installed the stock axle shaft. I'm just putting the wheel speed sensor, the ABS sensor back in. A little bit of blue Loctite on that bolt. And that thing's in pretty good. I decided to reuse the bolts that come with the RCV axle shafts for the simple reason that the heads of the bolts that the 13mm socket goes on were in much better shape than my stock. So I've got the 3 bolts started, and now I'll start working them in a little bit at a time, and then I'll have to move turn the steering wheel and adjust the move the hub back and forth so I can access those 3 bolts behind there with the 13mm socket. And as I recall, I didn't look it up, but I'm pretty sure those get torqued to 75 foot-pounds, those 3 bolts on the inside. And then obviously I need to get the axle nut on, and in the end, after that unit bearing is on nice and tight and torqued, I'll put the axle nut on and torque that to 100 foot-pounds. And then I'll have to put the caliper back on, clean that up, and just kind of get this side. I'm going to stay focused on this side and get it put together, and then go do the other side. Okay, unit bearing installed, ABS sensor. The 3 inner bolts are torqued to 75 foot-pounds. The axle shaft is torqued to 100 foot-pounds. Now I want to clean up this caliper a little bit with some brake cleaner, and then throw the rotor on and mount that caliper. I'm going to clean that up nice, and believe it or not, these 21mm head bolts for the caliper adapter bracket get torqued to 120 foot-pounds. Got to make sure that happens. All right, driver's side is all buttoned up. There you see the stock Rubicon axle shaft. Reinstalled the unit bearing. Axle shaft nut, caliper, ABS speed sensor, worked the wire through, reattached it to all the rubber grommets, torqued the caliper adapter bracket bolts to 120 foot-pounds, cleaned the caliper all nice with some brake cleaner. Then I put my spacer ring on here, so I'll have a nice hub-centric rim when I put my tire on. So now I'm going to move over to the passenger side, which the RCV axle shaft will remain there. So we're going to keep that axle shaft in on the passenger side. All right, passenger side all put back together, torqued, staying with the RCV axle shaft. Front diff cover needs to be put on. I'll probably just catch a couple bolts loosely in case I still have a problem with the carrier. Driver's side, problem side, the side with the busted spline on the RCV axle shaft on the outer stub shaft, replaced with the Rubicon OEM axle shaft. Everything put back together, torqued, ready to put the tires and rims back on it, as well as the front diff cover. Or maybe I won't even put the diff cover on it at first. I need to take the vehicle off the jack stands and pull it out and jack it up out in the driveway and perform that test in 4-wheel drive with the lockers. All right, the front end is put back together. Tires are on, everything is torqued. Nothing's half-assed here. I left the front diff cover off. I'm going to gently pull this thing forward, jack it back up, put the entire Jeep on jack stands, and perform the same 4-wheel drive locker test and see what happens. I'm really hoping that we're okay here with this Rubicon axle shaft, replacing the busted splines, the RCV axle shaft that busted. Okay, once again, been down this road before. All 4 tires off the ground, floor jack in the rear, two jack stands in the front. Right now the Jeep is in 4-wheel drive low. I'm going to start it up and take my foot off the brake and see what happens. I'll also set this camera up in front of the front locker in front of the front carrier so we can actually watch what's going on in the front. And then I will engage the rear locker and the front locker. Hoping like heck that we're going to be okay. So we'll find out here shortly. All right, here we go. Okay, kind of interesting. I've got the front and rear locked, and just as I suspected, I went to turn the rear locker on. It flashed. I crawled under there and started moving the electrical connector, and sure as shit, the rear locker locked. So I'm completely locked now. I'm going to shut the vehicle down, and then I want to conduct that same test, turning the wheels here and see what happens. Okay, that's where we are right now. Okay, I'm turning the front tire. No matter which way I turn it, it is now turning the opposite tire. I'm going to go to the passenger side, conduct the same test. Okay, I'm in neutral and I'm locked front and rear. So now when I turn this tire, all my tires are turning. Same thing here. With my front and rear locked and the Jeep in neutral, all my tires are turning now. Beautiful. So I'm really pleased with that. Look at that. Jeep's in neutral, front and rear are locked. Let's take a look at the plate. You can see the locker plate is pushed all the way over to the left. No noise. In the end, the locker is good. And the problem was the torn outer stub shaft on the RCV axle shaft. By the way, no call back from RCV yet. I'll be in touch with them. Okay, I put the Rancho front differential cover on. As you know, I use a lube locker gasket, which I really like. In regards to the rock glider I run, not a big fan of it. When it gets hit, it puts tension on those four fingers. A lot of times I have to re-tap the 5/16 thread into the axle housing. But, as you know from previous videos, the one time I ran without it, ended up putting a hole in my rear axle housing. So I deal with this rock glider. I use red Loctite on those bolts, and what ends up happening is after you hit rocks, everything flexes and everything loosens. So you got to continuously monitor the tightness of these covers. But anyway, I know this front axle housing here takes 1.3 quarts of 80/90 Mopar oil. I have one full quart here, so I'm going to be a little shy. And I've been through this before. The Rancho has a nice little weep hole right there. When it's full, it just trickles right out of there. So I'm not expecting it to get full. I'll have to pick up another quart, but we'll have some oil in there. Okay, maiden voyage here. I'm not going to go too far, down to the center of town and back. I wasn't able to completely fill the front diff up. I got 1/4 of 80/90 in there, so I'm short 11 ounces, but I just want to test the vehicle out in two-wheel drive, take it to the center of town, and there's a beautiful look at my stock Dana 44 RCV axle shafts. I did call up RCV. I got their warranty department. Basically, you fill out a form with a description of how it broke or what actually broke, some part numbers, etc. When the axle shafts were purchased, and then I attached a picture. So that will get sent over to the techs, I'm told. They will look at it and get back to me within 1 to 3 business days, and hopefully they'll do the right thing, and that's give me the new driver's side RCV axle shaft. All right, gonna take this thing for a test drive. So I want to make special mention to a great mechanic, a real gentleman. His name is John. He's Ray's friend. He does a lot of work for Ray, and he really took time, spent some time with me on the phone, and he was more than willing to rebuild my factory locker if need be. And he was just a real gentleman, and just want to give a shout out to John. Thank you, John. Well, I can see since my last off-roading trip that my steering wheel's off again. There aren't too many times you go off-roading that I don't have to adjust this damn steering wheel. So she's facing shit, probably 1 o'clock. I got to bring this thing counterclockwise, but But besides that, it seems to be driving okay. 35 miles an hour right there. 40. Put some new brakes on the rear. While I had the calipers off, I noticed the fronts were pretty bad. I have the pads. I'll be changing those shortly too. These 37s definitely take their toll on brake pads, and those were the Power Stop Z36. They did a nice job stopping, but they did not last long. So she's driving pretty good. Miles an hour, cruising along in the rain with a passenger RCV axle shaft and a stock Rubicon OEM driver's side axle.